Imagine for a moment. It's late afternoon, and you're in an old wooden kitchen, one that brings to mind times gone by. The air is filled with the irresistible smell of a pot of beans bubbling on the stove. Every time the lid lifts a little with the escaping steam, the aroma becomes even stronger, more enveloping. It might be the memory of a Sunday at your grandmother's house, or perhaps a scene from an old movie that left an impression on you. Either way, it's impossible to deny. Beans have a special way of taking us to a place of comfort, simplicity, and belonging. But what you might not know is that beans, this seemingly common, almost humble grain, carry within them a history that spans millennia and, in some way, helps shape the destiny of humanity. It was once in the hands of the first farmers who set foot on the earth. It nourished warriors in battle, gave strength to families who endured difficult times, and served as a symbol of unity for people separated by oceans. And so, like a well-kept secret, beans have been a silent witness to the great transformations of history. You may think you know beans only as part of your favorite dish, but they are much more than that. They are survivors. They are symbols of resilience, creativity, and connection between people from different places and cultures. They are a link that transcends time, uniting grandparents, parents, and children around the table, in a tradition that seems never-ending. In this journey that we're about to begin, we won't just be talking about food. We'll be talking about a travel companion, a silent partner that has stood by humanity since its earliest steps. Get ready to discover how beans, this seemingly simple grain, have been a constant in our lives, nourishing bodies, sustaining communities, and, above all, telling a story that, in many ways, is the story of all of us. So, sit down, grab your spoon and your favorite plate, and let's dive into the story that began with a tiny seed and became one of the richest and most fascinating narratives the world has ever known. This is the story of the bean, and you're about to discover why it's much more than just food. It's our story, told one bean at a time. A very, very long time ago, the first humans were nomads, living off what nature provided. They hunted, fished, and gathered fruits and roots to survive. And it was during this quest for food that someone, somewhere in Central or South America, first noticed the pods hanging from wild vines. Inside them were beans, small but full of potential. At first, beans were not much different from any other wild plant. It was something people harvested and ate when they could. But what those early tribes realized was that beans had a secret. They were easy to store and lasted a long time, even under difficult conditions. And more than that, they were extremely nutritious. A handful of beans could keep a person strong and active throughout a long day of walking or work. But beyond their practicality, there was something more. The act of planting and harvesting beans became a ritual, a way for people to connect with the land. They realized that when they planted a dry seed in the soil, it sprouted and turned into a new plant. It was as if the bean was telling a story of rebirth, of how something seemingly dead could gain new life. And maybe that's why, from the beginning, beans came to symbolize hope and renewal. Over the centuries, different cultures found ways to cultivate beans alongside other plants. But no system was as perfect as the Three Sisters, developed by Native American tribes. The story of these three sisters is one of the oldest and most beautiful lessons about sustainable farming that the world has ever seen. As we mentioned earlier, corn grew first, tall and strong. But let's dive a little deeper into the role of each sister. The beans, which grew around the corn, were not just parasites climbing the stalk. They had a vital function. Their roots absorbed nitrogen from the air and fixed it in the soil, enriching it. This process made the land more fertile, ensuring that future corn crops would be healthy and productive. The squash, with its broad, creeping leaves, was not there just for decoration. It helped retain soil moisture and prevented the growth of weeds that could harm the corn and beans. But it wasn't just about cultivation. There was a lesson behind this technique. The idea that when we work together, we are stronger. The three sisters were a living example of how cooperation and interdependence can create something greater than the sum of its parts. They showed that when we respect nature and its rules, it rewards us. While beans were part of the diet of indigenous peoples in North America, they were also becoming essential in other parts of the world. In Mexico, for example, the Mayans and Aztecs began cultivating beans on a large scale. For them, beans were a gift from the gods, a plant with the power to feed their people in times of scarcity. In fact, beans were one of the pillars of the ancient Mayan and Aztec civilizations, along with corn and chili. They believed that these foods were essential for survival and that, without them, their culture and rituals could not thrive. And so, beans were not just food, they were an integral part of their spirituality. It was common, for instance, during religious ceremonies, for beans to be offered to the gods as a way of giving thanks for a good harvest or as a plea for protection. In South America, beans also played an important role in Incan civilization. The Incas had a deep respect for everything that came from the earth, and beans were seen as sacred food. They cultivated different varieties and believed that each one had a specific purpose, from feeding warriors to healing ailments. When the Europeans arrived in the Americas, they were fascinated by the variety of foods they encountered. Corn, potatoes, and of course, beans, were all unfamiliar to them. It didn't take long for the colonizers to start taking these new plants back to Europe. Beans, in particular, spread quickly across the European continent. There, they found a new home and new ways of being prepared. In Italy, they became the star of pasta e fagioli, a traditional pasta and bean dish that is still one of the favorites in many Italian homes today. In Spain, beans were incorporated into fabada, a delicious stew that is a true symbol of the Asturias region. But this expansion wasn't limited to Europe. When colonizers began transporting African slaves to the Americas, beans embarked on a painful and forced journey. Many Africans were already familiar with beans, as there were native species in Africa that were consumed in their homeland. And it was through the hard work and traditions brought by these people that beans took deep root in the cultures of North and South America. It's impossible to talk about the history of beans without mentioning slavery. And here, the story becomes heavier, but also more powerful. During the centuries of slavery in the Americas, African slaves were often fed beans. It was a cheap, easy-to-cultivate food capable of sustaining those who worked tirelessly in the sugarcane, cotton, and coffee fields. But beans were not just food. They became a symbol of resistance and survival. In many cases, enslaved people cooked beans at night, after an exhausting day of work, using any seasoning they could find to add flavor to this food that kept them alive. Today, beans continue to be present on the tables of many Americans. Whether in a can of baked beans served at a Sunday barbecue, in the traditional southern green beans with ham, or in a steaming bowl of chili on cold winter nights, beans are part of the history and culinary identity of the United States. If you enjoyed discovering more about the history of beans and how they are present in our culture and roots, I invite you to continue this journey with us. Here at Roots and Flavors, we explore much more than flavors. We uncover stories that often go unnoticed but shape who we are. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with someone who also loves discovering the essence behind foods. And remember, every dish has a story to tell. Shall we discover it together?